Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for coming to Zibby's Bookshop. We're super excited to host this event. So thank you guys so much for coming. I will hand it over right away. We have books at the front if you want to come grab some after. I know a lot of you have them. Cool. So I'll just hand it over to you guys. Thank you guys so much for coming, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I would argue, thank you all for your patience. Elissa, I'm assuming everyone knows you enough. If not, we can read your bio so we can get right to it. But I want to know, I've been studying care for 10 years now, so I understand why this is important. But why do you think that the issues that you're writing about now are especially urgent?
Yeah, I think part of where this book came from is writing like article after article after article about why we don't have paid leave, why we don't have universal affordable child care, elder care, why it's just so hard to care in this country and stay sane and also economically solvent. And at some point I was like, I cannot write another one of these stories, and someone else needs to. I'm just done. Like, I paid my dues. I did it for like 5 years, And I was like, there's something deeper going on. There's something cultural that really needs to shift as well. It's not just a policy problem. And I started digging, and I was like, oh wow, like we are really deeply not aware of care, like in every part of how we view life and how we make meaning, how we value our time. And so, we're in this care crisis. It's not going anywhere as boomers age and as parents have kids later. And if we want to make it better, and also we want to appreciate care more and get away from a world where care feels mostly like a burden, which it does for too many people now. Like, we need this whole paradigm shift. And that's what I tend to do.
Mm-hmm. Who would identify as a caregiver here? It's actually interesting because when you ask that of men, especially in the workplace, even if they're fathers, they don't raise their hand, which I think is interesting for how we've defined caregiving. So Can you talk about your definition of caregiving in the book versus what we've traditionally looked at as caregiving?
Yeah, so in the book, and it's funny, we like so much back and forth about the subheadline, like caring for others, parenting, caregiving. Does this sound too academic? Is this alienating? What do we call this thing? Which I think actually is its own like proof of why the book is necessary, because we lack language around it. And so for me, how I define care in this book was like ongoing dependency relationships, paid and unpaid. If someone is dependent on you to thrive or survive, or some mixture of the two, you are a caregiver. And you're seeing the word caregiver increasingly being used for parents as well, to have a more inclusive term. Like my kids' school uses caregivers. So whether or not you're a bio parent or not, like you're the person caring for this kid. But we still generally, when we say the word caregiver, we think of it as a separate thing. But I really wanted to kind of put it all together in a way it's not usually put together. What does it mean to really have someone depend on you and not like go volunteer and then be able to leave, but actually like you're kind of stuck with that person whether you like it or not, which isn't entirely the case for paid caregivers, but the paid caregivers, there's enough of them who spend years caring for someone where it is the connection there is really rich and deep. It's the kind of relationship that you can't walk away from, and that person needs you.
And so what I love about your book is you have some really beautiful storytelling. You have a chapter called A New Man. You talk about this David, a lot of different caregiving stories. So can you tell maybe, it's not spoiling the book, but maybe one or two stories that surprised you or stood out the most?
Yeah. I'll start with David Pullman, who, when you're a journalist and you find your story, you're kind of like, is this real? Like, are you, did I imagine you? Am I dreaming? Like, are you, this is like, so this guy grew up in, his dad was in the Army. He grew up in Colorado on an Army base, real tough love dad, kind of what you might imagine. He himself felt like he could never do right by his father, so he might as well do wrong by his father. Took that path, ended up in jail. Ended up, he did a lot of drugs. He did a lot of violent crimes. He did not explain all of those to me. Finally gets out of prison and has a kid, and is just like fundamentally changed by the act of caring for his child. And he is just the epitome of the macho guy who could never be vulnerable, who could never talk about his feelings, who never really could try to like see the other and have that act that care demands of us, of really seeing someone else and how that can reflect yourself back to you, which definitely happened to me many times over with caring for my sons. It just totally changed him, and it turned him into someone who is able to share his feelings, is able to empathize with others, is able to be vulnerable. And now he's also caring for his parents, including his dad, as well. And his dad still can't get there with him, but he's able to show up in a way for his dad now because of what caring for his daughter unlocked in him.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful story. So I was very moved by that story. And any other stories that you felt were extra surprising to you? People that sort of were in a paradigm that you didn't expect?
Yeah, and another one is like a closer to home one, but I think it's still a really beautiful, surprising story. A woman named Kimmy Berlin who lives in New Jersey. She has 2 kids. Her kids have various, different neurodivergent diagnoses and depression, anxiety. And so I don't want to say, this is her language, her kids are imperfect, right? Mm-hmm. She herself was raised in like a big magisterial New Jersey home. Like everyone's hair was always perfectly done, and they had dinners with tablecloths and, fine china. And she had to answer the phone like, Berlin residents, Kimmy speaking. So she had to kind of be perfect. And she had this idea that like perfection is how you get love. You are loved because you are good or perfect, or you fulfill some measure that someone else put on you. And she herself, of course, like most of us, did not actually feel perfect. She felt flawed in many ways and always felt like she wasn't worthy of love as a result. And loving these kids who struggle, life's not always easy for them. They make life hard for her a lot. They drive her nuts too. But loving these kids, it like opened up her capacity to love herself. She's like, oh, I see what it's like to be worthy of love, even if you're not perfect. And now I feel myself worthy of love. And she divorced their father, which that relationship was based on this unhealthy idea of love that she had. And now she's dating someone else for the first time in her life based on this idea of like, I can be my imperfect self and someone will love me.
Yeah, it's really, really, really important. So let's talk about the barriers to care. Because you coined, I think, sort of an important new term. Can you talk a little bit about it and what you see as barriers to caregiving in everywhere, but especially in the U.S.?
Yeah. So, as I started this book thinking about care through the lens of feminism, which was really I don't want to saddle feminists with all the care, problems at all with this country. It's hardly feminist fault. But for me, the first place I kind of felt like I was not necessarily taught to value care was, I now know, like certain white late 20th century feminisms. Through this book, I learned there are many other feminisms in which care was really frontal and valued and fought for. Actively fought for. Again, mostly Black and working class feminisms. So in thinking this through, I kind of felt like what is going on in feminism, but also in me? Like, why do I feel like this like longing to care for my kids, for like liking motherhood, which somehow became like such a weirdly taboo thing to say. Like, what barriers? And then it still befuddles me, but it's true, And what barriers are going on? What's happening? And I thought of what is the central metaphor for feminism? It is the glass ceiling, and the glass ceiling is achieving more really power and money, than women historically have, and being men's equal. And I love breaking the glass ceiling. I'm not wearing pants today, but I love wearing pants. I love having a credit card. I love my job. Like, I really hope there's one day a woman that's the president of the United States of America. Like, yay for breaking the glass ceiling. But something else is holding women back as well. And it's not up. It's not a ladder pointing up. It's not ambition. It's not about money or power. It's this like idea, and it's basically been in our lives and in human lives since really industrial times. It really came about during the Victorian era when we started separating work from home. And there's these barriers I call glass doors, and they keep care locked inside the house. They keep caregiver stories as being seen as uninteresting or unimportant. When, oh God, like she's just talking about her kids, or oh, he's just talking about his parent with dementia. Like, we don't want to hear that. But like, oh, you went on a 10-day meditation retreat? Like, you're the most interesting person at this dinner party. Tell us everything when you didn't talk for 10 days. So like, what stories do we value in our society, right? And that's glass doors. That's because we keep care locked inside. Also, we keep care separate from systemic support. And that's another way glass doors work, right? We do not have it. I mean, you just want to say it again and again, and it's still like, we don't have at least universal paid leave in this country. Like, you get sick or a family member gets sick, you are not guaranteed money and time to care. That's another glass door, because there's a fantasy, again, that what happens in the home is a separate thing from the rest of society. So you break those glass doors, and not only are we supporting caregivers, but we're also welcoming that wisdom we get from caring out into the world. Whether you're going to bring that to your job as a lawyer, which you could and should, your job as a president, which you could and should, or anything else you do in the world. Like, this should be something that care should be in conversation with everything else, not locked in behind these glass doors.
I thought that was such an important metaphor, because I agree. I mean, the work that I do, I believe the glass doors are more important than glass ceilings, because if you look at our pay gap, does anybody know what 80% of our pay gap is from between men and women? Anybody?
What do you mean from?
Like, why 80% of the pay gap between men and women can be attributed to motherhood? And so again, I think these glass doors are really important. Hi, Darby. Yes, we want to engage you in the Q&A. Darby's a researcher also in many different areas, maternal stress, the gender division of labor.
She's in the book.
In the book,
Yeah.
yes. Wonderful.
She's in like 50% of articles. And
Yes,
everything. I'm always like, I know who's the best.
Teenage
Darby.
health, yes.
So they're private.
So these glass doors they're very, very powerful. So if you had to look at the policies that you talked about in the book, is there one policy that, there's no magic, wand, but you talk about paid leave. Is that the one that you would adopt first?
Oh my gosh, it's like, it's like being starving and
Yeah.
and without a home, and it's like, do you need food or
Right,
shelter
yeah.
or water? It's all of it. It's just a triage situation, the care crisis in this country. Yes, but I also, we just need, yes, I don't know, I can't pick one, but I think, there's something about paid leave that almost seems like, in addition to being like absolutely necessary in kind of plain material terms, it's also like a symbolic gesture at this point. Like, we live in a society that understands people have to care. Like, end of story. And it's also like, with elder care policy and with child care policy, like, it is trickier to really find something that's effective. Even, we looked at these European countries, they have a lot of these supports for moms, but sometimes those supports for moms actually keep moms out of the workforce. Like, it's not simple. But pay leave is simple. It's like 6 weeks, like, you have a baby, 8 weeks, like, guaranteed, being able to care for yourself, care for your child, or someone's, sick in the hospital, like, take a minute, figure out what this entails, care for this person in this most urgent time. And so, yeah, I'll start there.
Yes. Well, let's start with paid leave.
Yes.
Thank you for advocating for this. What's been your biggest pushback
With
anything when you're talking about the value of caregiving?
Yeah, that it's hard. That's the burden, and it's really hard. I feel like we're stuck still in such like kind of simple narratives around care, where it's either a fairy tale or it's a nightmare, and it has to be either or somehow, instead of like this big, rich, messy middle. That's also messy middle. That's also just like this core part of being a human. And I think people can get twitchy. It's like, wait, I'm living in hell right now, and you're telling me this is good? And I was like, no, it's hard, and it's awful, and it should be less hard if you're part of what you're experiencing is, right, some economic burden because you're caring. But this idea that it's good not because it's nice and sweet, but it's good actually because it really does push us and challenge us and make us reconceive ourselves, other people, the world, what it means to be a human. That's we kind of need to create that middle ground. And I often think when people say it's hard, and I'm just like, how many like Steven Spielberg war movies have we all sat there? Like, war is hard, but like we give it so much curiosity, you know? Or like these Netflix documentaries where like a man who doesn't speak like spends the whole time climbing like some rock in Yosemite, you know, like that was hard for him, but we're all like, oh, that's fascinating. Like it's hard, but it's enriching and good, and like let's invest in understanding it. That's what I want for care.
Mm-hmm. So it's hard, but care is still seen as an unnecessary story to tell.
Right.
And did you see that in terms of a gender difference? Do you think it's harder for men to embrace the narrative of care, especially in work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think back what you're saying at the beginning, like men, right, even just to get them to like say the word out loud is actually like, if we could get all men who care just to like be the first people in this room to raise their hands when someone asks like, who cares? Like that would be a big step forward. You know, it's even just to identify as a caregiver. And then, right, it's you know, back to being able to speak about in the workplace, not just, and you know, there's been a lot of progress. I even see it, my sister is right there, and she is 5 years younger than me. And even in her generation, I'm seeing even so much like more, you know, more involved dads, more willingness to say to their bosses, like, I got to go to the doctor's appointment, I got to go to baseball, whatever. Then I even see, you know, with my peers at 5 years older. But right, we need men, right, to do more. And again, not just to help women, because they can enrich them too. And we need them to bring those care selves into the workplace, which will make space for moms to also own that the fact that they care responsibilities, but also right, change the narrative of how we connect, how we work, like what our lives outside of work are.
Yeah, I was thinking of your book recently because I was reading this sociologist, her name is Alice Evans, and she was talking about home confinement. She said it's been a patriarchal idea for 2,000 years. She had a whole post on the foot binding of Chinese women, that literally binding women to the home, it was the way for them, you know, sort of to control procreation and to have women not in the lack of, in the spheres where decisions and power were being made. So do you think that my question is, you know, how many more years do you think it's going to take to basically dismantle what we've been taught for 2,000?
Right, the separation of the home.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No,
Yes.
It's a great question. I mean, I think, you know, as do you, like this is really one of the like great frontiers of feminism right now, and it's something feminism didn't really address in the last 40 years. And again, I don't want to dismiss, like, I liked Sex and the City feminism. I had, you know, I enjoyed all these waves, you know, like all. But this is really what we need to break through, and we really need to see the home in fundamentally different terms. It's not a place where we have to handle everything on our own. It's not a place where we keep separate from the rest of our lives. And it's happening. I mean, that's what's kind of exciting too, right? Your work and many other women I write about. And there's been a huge care justice movement that even just this last month has been huge for. President Biden says the word care more than like any president that at least I remember in my lifetime, and says care like I'm saying care here today. You know, that it's like this like thing that humans do. I mean, it sounds so obvious, but it wasn't even spoken about. You know, that there's this thing called care, and we need to support it. So I feel like I want to inject optimism into it too. Like I think we're in a moment.
So what are you most optimistic about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think the first step is really creating language. Like we need to have some sense of shared vocabulary of parenting, caregiving, care. Not to pick on men, but like I will say when I've been interviewed by men, they're more like, "What do you mean by care?" So it's, and you know, fair enough. Like it's not the sea you're swimming in. This is this the thing that we do, and again, just to hear President Biden talk about it, and have policy plans about it. And I think there has been like a great opening of narratives about motherhood, which is really important. And not just there's a lot of like maternal ambivalence of like, did I want kids? Do I want kids? Don't I want kids? And once I have the kids, do I like this kid or don't I like this kid? Which is good. Like that's real, and that's something that many women experience. But there's also a kind of ambivalence of like, how does having this kid change how I fit in the world? And what does that mean for my identity overall? And it's something that's being spoken about out loud, way more than it was, I think, a generation or certainly 2 generations ago.
And then do you think it's optimistic? This is actually a question for you when people know I was coming here. There's a lot of trends, especially in Asia, of women refusing to have children, and with agency, with agency saying, I don't want to be part of what I see around me, and there's not the supports. So, and then you see that there's government responses now, sort of panicking, trying to pay people to have children. So tell me a little bit about, do you think that's optimistic, that there's agency amongst women to say, I don't want to be part of this until there's a better narrative for how I can be supported? Or do you think that that's ultimately going to lead to more scary things like repealing divorce and forcing women to stay in marriages and other things?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I actually want to step back because it's come up a lot of people talk about, oh, America's such an individualistic country and there's these more collectivist countries. And wouldn't it be great if America was less individualistic? And I always have to like clarify, like, it's not just individualistic versus more collective countries, because in these collectivist countries, they still actually don't give a shit about caregivers.
Right.
And I feel like that, and it's even in like my own religious tradition of Judaism, which is very communitarian. It's very much about the collective. Also, don't really want to hear from caregivers are not authorities, so it's possible to be this collective culture and not actually. My mom is momming.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's possible to not actually invest in care, be curious about care. But I think what you have right in Asia, it's these pro-natalist policies. Again, I mentioned with Germany, like they can be very good for women, or they can actually keep women back in the home. And we're like, have more babies. How do we get you to have more babies? Do we, are you going to get a year of paid leave? Or you going like, what's the right policy factor? And to me, that's why, again, like if we want, I don't say women to have more babies, but if we want humans to see like the richness of having children and not seeing it as a burden and not seeing as something that like then ties them forever to the patriarchy. We have to have more, like not just have that policy change, but have that deep curiosity about care. We need that culture change, and we need to elevate caregivers, have them be voices that have some kind of public authority by virtue of having cared for someone else.
Right. And what's also, I think, optimistic is you see there's these new a whole host of TikTok influencers of young people who are in care of their elders.
Yes.
And we actually, caring across generation with the Fair Play Policy Institute, we gave prizes last year to 5 different caregivers who showed what their caregiving journey looked like, including this one man named Chris Punselin, who was a 25-year-old young man taking care of his grandmother who just recently died. And so do you think that part of caregiving is also to expand, as you've done, the definition from just a parent-child relationship to other types of caregiving?
Yeah, and I think it's really important. I mean, it's very different. Obviously, like caring for a healthy, relatively easy child is very different than caring for a parent with dementia. So I don't want to diminish or dismiss those differences. But at the same time, I think the experience of being other-directed is something that we experience in both. And I think people surprise themselves when they find that meaningful, especially in our individualistic culture, when it's like, oh, it's actually like I'm getting something from this. And, all those, I think the New York Times just coined them carefluencers.
Yes.
But they are, I love them. I mean, they really are like, it's so touching. I was just, one of them the other day said, someone, a nurse came over to her house and was like, you do this on your own? Like, kind of like what? And she's like, yeah, I do. And like, I want to be here with my mom doing this. Like, I'm invested in it. So yeah, I think if we have some language about it, it's like you have to name it to then understand it. And so if we can, and I think when you see these young carefluencers, it's a hard one to get at. They're doing amazing work, and the more we could see what's in common, what they're doing, and learn from them, and let all the caregivers and parents and everyone learn from each other, let everyone else learn from all the parents and caregivers, the better off we are.
Now you have this really interesting chapter, or it's sort of throughout the book, but a philosophy of care. Can you talk a little bit about also how spirituality and different religions view care?
Yeah. So so there's part of digging into this was really trying to understand how care was ignored in like our big meaning making systems. And two of our biggest meaning making systems is like philosophy and religion. In philosophy, there was just long-standing, particularly Western philosophy, a real preoccupation with like the independent self. Like when philosophers thought of people, they thought of a lot of like independent selves engaging with other independent selves, and they kind of ignored human relationships in the process. And obviously, like relationships are not an insignificant part of our life. So for me, this book actually really began with they're called care ethicists, this corner of philosophy that's like, oh, let's pay attention to like human dependency, because and they were mostly women. In the late 70s, early 80s, this started. And really thinking about care in this like deep, serious, rigorous way, in the way that philosophers think about things, and putting the relationship in the mix. So for them, there's all these different ways we don't think about being good people. Maybe we follow rules like the 10 Commandments or something, and it's like, thou shalt not steal, so we don't steal. Or maybe it's like a more virtue system, and we're like, I am honest, therefore I don't steal. Or maybe utilitarian about it. You're like, I'm gonna figure out, like, if I steal, like, will it create more bad or more good for the world? And that will influence the decision. So care ethicists came along, and they're like, what does this mean for the relationship you're in? What does it mean for this like one and only human sitting before you at this one and only moment in time? That should be in our mix when we think about what's the right thing. And I'm sure we've all known people who are like really good people, and they have this like really rigorous ethics, but then they're like kind of jerks to everyone they know. I worked in the labor movement for a while, and it was very eye-opening. I was like, you're all mean to work? Like, why are you mean to a security guard? We're here campaigning for security guards. Like,
Right.
And so what they lacked was care ethics, right? What they lacked was like, what about this relationship? And in care ethics, to go back to like the being dishonest, or like maybe you help a child. If your child has a really bad day of bullying, maybe you kind of like do their homework for them, even though that like goes against your broader ethics. But like right there, right now, that's what that relationship means. So it was really eye-opening for me to see care being taken this seriously. There's one philosopher in particular, Nell Noddings, who was like, kind of a Norman Rockwell painting, but this like brilliant Stanford philosopher. She had 10 kids. She had her own custom station wagon. They drive across the country. She loved like pretty tablecloths and nice floral arrangements in the middle. And she just thought so deeply about care. And even that was almost enough. I was like, oh, someone's thinking deeply about care. But she also thought of what it means to really care for someone. Like, what does it mean to care well for someone? This is a question we all ask ourselves all the time, but we don't really have like big thinkers that help us think it through. And also how we balance caring for other people with our care for everyone else. We're not like supposed to say it out loud, but like, I mean, I'll say it out loud. Like, I care more about my kids than I do about all of you. Like, I mean, not really, but also I do. Like, and you probably, if you have kids, you probably think that too. Like, so what do you do with that? And how can you still be a good person while like kind of saying that out loud to yourself? And how do you balance the tension of like knowing you're going to invest more in your children? You cannot care for poor children across the world like you care for your children. If you think you can, you're actually ignoring what real care entails. So it's about balancing, right? Like they really thought through deeply, like what does it mean when someone's dependent on you to be a good person? And then in religion, it was like there's so many cool feminist theologians that are trying to put care as like into like what it means to really connect with, whether you call it God or the divine or the universe, whatever, and really challenge the way religion has just kind of ignored care. One of my favorite Presbyterian theologian talks about how basically, right, like if you care for the naked and poor outside your house, you're like literally a saint. Like Mother Teresa was literally a saint because she cared for orphans across the world. But like for like the woman who has 3 kids and then the mother-in-law living with her, and she's not, no one's even looking, no one's talking about her. No one gives 2 shits. She's not a saint, you know? So what's going on there? And how did that become like such a deep part of Christianity, that caring for this stranger was way up here, and caring for your child is like just Virgin Mary in a painting, never saying a word, locked into this portrait of like goodliness and saintliness forever. So how can we really get caregivers kind of out of that like idealized Virgin Mary? Or in Judaism, there's the Woman of Valor, which is a song we sing praising this like amazing woman on every Friday night at the Shabbat dinner table. But in traditional Jewish homes, like the women aren't even allowed to sing it out loud, you know? So it's like she's so great. This woman is like, you've never met such a woman. Like she can do everything. She works. She's the best mom. She sews. She's not allowed to lead her community. Like, you know, why not? What's going on there? So there's all these amazing theologians who are like, we should really be seeing care as this like rich spiritual experience, and not dismiss the fact that caregivers can't have, by virtue of being caregivers, the same religious experiences that like independent people, traditionally men can have by like going to, you know, church or a mosque or a synagogue in a certain fashion. And maybe those religious experiences are taking place at home while caring for someone.
Yes, I think those chapters are so interesting. In Judaism, or at least in more Orthodox Judaism, women don't get bat mitzvah because we're assumed to be automatically more holy. So again, there's all these things that sort of take away our agency, and I thought it was really interesting that you explore why they're ignored. But it does seem by design. Yeah, it does seem by design and control. So I think it's very important that you're highlighting people who are bringing it back into the narrative. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the process of writing the book. How many people did you interview? How long did it take you?
Yeah.
I talked to you, I think, during the pandemic, so it took a while. And then how did you decide how to organize it into what chapters?
Yeah. Well, I should say I had a totally different idea than that.
Yeah, organized. I sort of remember that. That's what I'm asking. Yeah.
Right. So the book took about 4 years, you know, kind of from the process of selling it to the process of writing it to then editing it. It's all just publishing moves very slowly, shockingly slowly. And right, you know, for me, it really started with the more like internal experience of care, of what is this doing to my mind, and my story as a mom is woven through this book, and how is this challenging and shaping me. And then from there, moved out to the societal piece. You know, it's like, because we have a blind spot to care as individuals, and we also have this blind spot to care as a society. So it started for me, and I thought the book would start. I have a chapter about evolution and Charles Darwin, who you learn like we all, I think most of us, we think Charles Darwin, we think survival of the fittest, like humans are competitive. But as it so happens, he thought like care and sympathy were like just as important as competition for human survival. So it was my idea to start the book there. Like we started kind of like this core piece of our story, which is evolution, and then from there we move into like the body and the mind and the soul, and then out to the economic piece and the gender piece. But my editors and agent were like, you need to start with the feminism. They're like, I was like, but this book isn't just for like women and feminists. They're like, that's women by books. We're starting with women.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how it got organized.
But I think what you just said was something I don't want people to gloss over in terms of, we look at Darwin as survival of the fittest, but what you just said was really interesting. I remember you had mentioned that to me before about what you found about Darwin. So I know you talk about obviously in the book, but can you tell everybody here sort of what you found? Because I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, it's a really moving story. So Darwin had many children, and you know, like it was back then, many of them died even before age 1. But he had one daughter, his favorite daughter, who died at age 10, and it was a deep, great loss. You know, I feel like we hear about the past and we hear about the like child mortality and infant mortality. It almost seems like they must have got used to it, but like they didn't, you know, it's still losing a child at age 10. And it was actually this loss of his daughter Anne that it stayed with him for years, and Darwin couldn't figure out. He's like, what is the evolutionary purpose of me, like 30 years later, still being so sad about my daughter dying? And he wasn't like a monster. Darwin also was like, based on my not very thorough dive into like great men in history, Darwin seems like the nicest one. Like, he was a good guy. I mean, the rest of them, like, almost overwhelmingly, like, all of like sleazeballs, but like, he seemed like a really good guy, like, not super nice guy. So he wasn't doing this from like, why am I feeling human feelings? He actually was just like deeply intellectually curious. Like, I am someone invested in evolution of like why, how humans evolve, you know, how we got here, what serves us, what's you know, how does this serve us in terms of our evolutionary fitness? And I am still so connected to this girl. And you know, from that he realized that like the parental instinct is just this key part, and you know, and parental instinct that then extends to all sorts of care. But this like this instinct, we're wired to care, you know, it's like deeply in us, and that itself was actually like a fundamental part about human survival. And that's really to realize, like, it's not just a matter of competition, it's also a matter of like this just like wiring for connection. Like, we want to care for another who's needy, and it helps that person survive, and then the species survives.
I just thought that was so interesting, like to look at grief through that lens of the evolutionary. So it's fascinating. And then speaking of longevity and care, tell us about what you learned about longevity. Like, are people's lives enriched at the end of life? Are there longevity benefits to caregiving? What did you find about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I feel like there's 2 studies where the researchers were expecting to find that like care was terrible for you.
Yeah, I love it.
And then they learned that it wasn't. And one of them was a longevity study, and thinking of this as caregivers for like a spousal caregiving towards the end of life, and found that like these caregivers were actually living longer, and was really surprised by that, because again, we still have this narrative of burden around care, and never want to discount that care is harder in this country than it should be. But people also, it really does give them great meaning and purpose. It also just gets you out of bed. It keeps you active. You have something to do. Your brain's stimulated. You know, you're not sitting all day and doing nothing. So that, you know, that was a surprising finding. And again, like, you know, often these researchers go looking for one thing and find another thing. And then there was another big study looking at people who do paid caregiving. And this was the kind of paid caregiving you might think of, but it also included teachers and even hairdressers. It was a broader group, and assumed that people who do any kind of what we sometimes refer to emotional labor in their jobs, where they're like not just doing job, but actually kind of trying to emotionally care for the people that they're interacting with in their work, that they would, you know, have less job satisfaction, be unhappier. And it turns out actually they were happier. So it's this, like, you know, emotional labor can be something that is a burden for women, but also emotional labor can be something that gives her a lot of great meaning, you know, at the right dose.
Yes.
Yeah, with the right respect.
With respect, exactly, and visibility.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to get the questions?
Yes. Sorry, I have one more question for you. What is your prescription? And just to wrap up before we get to the question, what is your prescription? Because the conclusion has a lot to do with sort of interconnectedness. So I think we call it interdependability, interdependently, right? So I think your book has a lot to do with what's happening with the loneliness epidemic.
Yeah.
And so, given that our Surgeon General just declared loneliness as a profound epidemic for Americans, what do you think your prescription would be if you were in conversation with him?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Sounds great. I mean, I think we can't ignore the overlap between the caregiving crisis and the loneliness crisis, and because the caregiving crisis is really born out of the like fundamental lack of support for family structure to make families work. And not that there has to be any type of family. I think that's also, we get caught up when we talk about these things, that a lot of people kind of advocate for family or advocating for husband, wife, you know, like a certain family makeup. define family however you want, but like when we kind of invest in family structures, which is investing in care, we will help people not get to a place where they will not be alone, and will help the loneliness crisis. And then also, right, just having a societal value of kind of sticking with people. It's easy, it's easier and easier to detach. We live alone. We like this idea that obligation, an obligatory relationship is something that is like a bad word, which, happens sometimes. And to think like care is a stick with it relationship, like again, it's kind of woven into it. So to really, I really wanted to see the connective tissue there between caregiving crisis and loneliness crisis. But I think it's big time. Yeah.
I really think your book is a great prescription for that. So thank you so much for writing the book. I'd love to take some questions. Darby, I think I'll start with you, only because I think you're featured in the book, and I'd love for you just to be in conversation with maybe a question or comment about care.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just want to say how much I loved this book. I just thought it was absolutely wonderful to just explain to like the inner monologue of everyone who cares just like so perfectly. And I was really interested in your own journey into motherhood and sort of how that kind of upended some of the sort of feminist, like upbringing, I guess, that you had, and I'd be curious if you were talking about that.
Yeah. So I feel like this book, right, I already spoke about like the first I had with writing this book of feeling like, all right, I can't write another article about paid leave. Like I want to dig into the culture piece. But as I was realizing this cultural blind spot around me, I also realized I myself had like a deep cultural blind spot towards care, and really felt like I had to protect myself from motherhood's like colonizing forces to make me less cool or interesting or relevant. And thought for a minute, I figured it out that I would like be a mom, love my kid. I didn't have ambivalence, and luckily I didn't have postpartum depression. Like it wasn't about connecting with my kid or wanting to be a mom. The ambivalence was about like, how does that mom self integrate with all my other selves? And it was right. It was kind of this like secondary epiphany that really gave birth to the book. It really happened when my eldest Augie started talking. So he like really became this whole other person, and the intimacy of the parent-child relationship and seeing myself like almost mirrored back to me through him. I learned a lot about myself, like a lot. And I was like, oh, wait, I've been told like to, go on these backpacking trips or all these things you're supposed to do to like learn about yourself and expand your understanding. Like for me, care was way bigger than any of those. And I was like, no one told me this.
Alana, love your book. Great last name. So I'm curious if you think that COVID accelerated the narrative around care and just the public acceptance to talk about it. I know we talk about glass ceilings and glass doors. I'm going to take that metaphor and reframe it a little bit. And that like we all essentially started living in glass houses and that everyone could see inside. Whereas like our lives were very compartmentalized before. You literally work from home. People literally saw inside the house and inevitably saw your surroundings. And just someone who works in like a corporate setting, like that to me has persisted in that like, whereas like particularly men who never talked about their kids, never like talked about their home responsibilities, all of a sudden their kids, I mean, you saw that famous news reporter who's like all of a sudden their kids were like bringing them sandwiches at 2:00 and it just kind of broke down this wall. And then like the head of my company stayed home last week because he got a puppy. Like that would have never happened before COVID. And so I'm just curious if you feel like, well, it did many worse things than good, but like COVID just kind of, it blended our professional and personal lives in a way that just accelerated the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like all my sister's work stories, I'm like, like it's just, they actually give me so much hope because I feel like there is so like, she's able to be a parent, able to be deeply professionally ambitious and with way less conflict than I think, again, someone 5 or 10 years older than you. So I think that was totally true, just only for the as some sociologists call the laptop class. So it's like people who can work on their laptops. Yeah, and it's, so I think, and for that was amazing. I think so and it really did like, did break those glass doors for sure, because you were literally working from home. Like there was no, this whole Victorian era, invention of like the domestic space versus the public space was ruptured a million times over. It just, unfortunately, right, it's not for people who clock in somewhere or get these like unpredictable schedules. It's a big problem in our country that a lot of people who work at restaurants or stores get their schedules like a day before the work week, and how are they supposed to. So I think, for the laptop class, 100%, but we still need those big, large scale policies to make sure for everyone else.
Yeah, great job. You talked about sort of naming things in the last door, and I guess I'd be curious in the transition in post-care stages. So like there's a name for empty nesting, but what about when you're caring for someone that passes away? What is that sort of glass door like of transitioning from like deep care for somebody and then you move to that next phase? Like just curious if you've done any kind of studying in that.
No, I love that though.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's exactly, if we took this really seriously as a huge part of life, which it actually is, we'd have language for that. I think that's right, because when you stop caring, you still have that caregiver stuff, you still have that attachment in you. And what does that look like?
It's probably Darwin, same thing, when
Darwin,
explored his loss.
Right.
It's the exact same sentiment
Yeah,
of that.
stays with you.
Yeah.
Right, and what do you do?
How do you integrate back when you're so deeply caring?
Yeah.
So
Right, and I think part of it is just I would say, the one thing I want people to get from this book is curiosity about care. Just ask people their care stories. I still have friends who I'm like, how's it going with your dad who lives, and you don't want to hear about this. I'm like, no, I really do. I really want to hear about it. I want to hear the kvetching. I want to hear all the things you don't like, and I want to hear what's it like for you. So it's that curiosity piece, and with the curiosity comes the language, comes this idea that this is something we do talk about.
I didn't hear enough, but I'm sure it's there. I haven't read the book. 80%, 90% of the care is women. So I didn't hear the gender part. That is which comes first. It's interactive. Take care of the women, stay home. They take care of the kids. They're not paid, and then they're expected. And as my daughter has, they're not interested. Oh, you used to be interesting. Now you're just a mom.
Right.
It's nobody's making it glamorous, but the gender, sexism, not just a class thing. That when we come to talk about that integrated life of home and work, it's so classist, right? I mean, it's only the women who are not going on caring for other people's kids during the pandemic, or they're in school.
Yeah.
Social workers. A good friend of mine did a study of women taking care of their elderly parents. I mean, the caregiving role for elderly parents 20 years ago, Eve Rodsky, nothing was written about it. And then, of course, it was 85% women doing that. And where were the men? I mean, they were absent.
Right.
The whole paradigm, they're not even considered that. So I keep thinking.
There's a whole chapter in the book about
Yeah,
it.
I'm sure. Okay, right. But I just want to say that, Hillary Clinton, it takes a village, keeps coming to my mind. The minute I came in here, she was chastised. What do you mean it takes a village? It takes a family. It takes a mother. I mean, what the right wing did to that slogan was extraordinary. I was so angry then, and I'm still angry.
Yeah.
Because I do not think it's changed as much as I'm happy that there's optimism for the younger generation.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, right, in terms of men, they are doing more care. They're doing more care, and they're actually identifying more as people who take pride in care, get meaning from care. So there is positive movement in that direction. And I think, and right, I mean, part of the problem is the way we raise our sons. And how many people had male babysitters growing up? We don't raise men to be intuitive caregivers. And also, sometimes moms can guardrail care as much as they want their husbands to help. They're like, oh my God, how could you dress the kids like this to go to this party? Get out of my way. So what does that do to dads? Are they going to be like, oh, I'll get them dressed for you? They're going to be like, you get them dressed. So there's all sorts of reasons why men don't do care, which I talk about in the book. And then I think, the village piece is huge. And I think it's because we kept care so small in our imagination in a way, and we realize how big it is. And it's oh, of course we need help. Of course we can't do this on our own. But when we kept it like locked up into that like Virgin Mary portrait, basically of just this like sweet Hallmark card situation, they were like, she's good, she's fine, she's home. It's sweet, it's nice, best job in the world, you know.
Yeah. I love that. The care is so small in our imagination. That's a beautiful metaphor to expand that imagination.
Hi, I'm Alex. I have a question around allyship. Like, I don't have kids, I'm not caring for my parents yet. I'm a queer person, so it requires a lot of allyship myself, like workplace normalizing some pronouns, things like that. So what can people do to be an ally?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think it actually fits right we're right in the neighborhood of that answer, because care is big. Like, when someone's dependent on you, you're not independent in the world anymore. Like, you have someone dependent on you, you cannot navigate the world like you would if you didn't. So you need care. And then so we become these like networks. We should become networks of care, and see yourself as a caregiver for the caregivers in your life. And that can be the smallest, it could just be like, Alana, let's go out and grab a drink because I think you've been working hard lately. It doesn't like, care can take so many forms. But the more we see ourselves as not independent beings, but actually like all tangled up in these big networks of care, care for the caregivers who are caring for the people who need the care, and you're in. That's that's the allyship.
Hi, Elissa.
I love it. It's like I have the naming is new to me.
For YouTube, it's important. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, my Instagram handle.
Yes, exactly.
You can find me at no. So I think I'm listening to it, and I just think it's so interesting because I think about the difference between men and women, the ability to, or the obligation and the intention for women to leave work when they have children versus men staying at work, right? Traditionally, the provider, the breadwinner, etc. And then you come back to the idea of recognition, right? Who's going to be recognized? Mom is expected. There's the expectation of staying at home, caring for the child, caring for the home, caring for the family. And the man, when he does come home after work and he's watching the kids long enough to make dinner, is applauded for having cared for the children while the mother's still caring for the husband and the children behind the scenes, right? So where do we go with that, right? I think that to your point, this next generation, it is a little bit different. I'm hopeful that I'm raising a sensitive son and a feminist who applauds women, champions women, and champions the idea that it is a 50-50.
Yeah.
Right? I do for you, you do for me, and that's how we care for each other, regardless of gender, regardless of who's getting applause for doing it.
Yeah.
How do we change that? I guess the idea is like, how do we change that in the workplace? How do we take out the idea that you have to get a gold star because you asked for paternity leave so that your wife can go, your partner can go, right? Your surrogate can go, whoever it is, your person can go and do what they need to do to care for themselves.
Yeah. No, I mean, those are all great questions.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, like, the cultural piece, that's why, for me, I'm like, this isn't just policy. Again, in Korea, they have the dream, they're in these Asian countries where women are literally going on strike and not getting married or having kids, giving them, like, the red carpet of policies, and they're still not into it. And why? Because it's that culture change piece. And that's why, that's where this book really started for me. It's like, can we really value care as something meaningful? And that as meaningful as these other endeavors, as work. So it's not just about like, women do the care and it's good for them, and then men go out and work. And like, can we have them both at the same time? Can we share them both at the same time? And not just because they're a burden, but because they offer us joy and meaning. And I think it's I always say, like, again, there's all those Mother's Day ads, like, most important job in the world. It's like, so why has a mom never been president? She did the most important job in the world, but there's never been a mother president. Like, so I think that's for me, it's like, that's the culture change piece. There was a George Clooney movie that came out over December, The Boys in the Boat. There was that classic Hollywood trailer with like the music, and you knew it was like, they were up against the odds and they were going to triumph, and I was like, I just want to see a Hollywood, like, George Clooney trailer, but for a caregiver, like, and have that heroic music at the end of the trailer. And you're like, and look at those kids, look at that parent she's cared for. And I feel like if we get that, and it's like, then the dynamic may not be the same between like a dad and a mom, and because we're really valued care, which we really don't do.
One good thing I will say is that I asked people in 2012, do you believe an hour holding a child's hand at the pediatrician's office is as valuable as an hour in a boardroom? And now we have probably 6,000 people answering that question. And I have seen that change. The answer for men was a resounding no in 2012. But we're seeing that culture change. So thank you for helping with that.
Do you want to do one more?
Oh, yes, we have one up there, yes.
Awesome.
Oh, that's so much pressure.
Yeah.
No, but so much of what you're talking about is these tension between dualities, the tension like Darwin, the evolutionary competition perspective, and then care, right? Being so far from tribe and fire and isolation, it's like, but in America in particular, we're talking about a culture shift and a policy shift, and it's like the chicken and the egg. But it's so much about the tension of what the mythology of America is, that we are a nation and a people built on self-actualization. If you want to become a millionaire, you become a millionaire because you work hard.
Right.
And then the tension of what you're talking about in acknowledging and validating being the caregiver, which underneath the surface actually talks about having to be reliant on another person and the vulnerability associated with that, but also then being inconvenienced of your own
Totally,
self-actualization. So I'm just curious of like where you're at in that, like looking at those two tensions and how we make a culture shift that could inform policy or shift the policy to help inform culture.
Yeah, right.
Great question to end on.
Yeah.
I know.
You did it.
So the professor.
Yeah, no, and it's, I mean, first of all, I think self-actualization is like a little bit BS. I think we co-actualize. I mean, we don't sell, all those posters on the wall and like whether it's like the coach, high school football coach, it was just all about like rugged individualism and you got this, if you work hard, you're going to do this. And that's not really how life works. But I think it is absolutely built in to our culture in such a problematic way that like we really think the good stuff is something we get or out there on our own, and we need that. I love my solitude. I work. I'm not advocating that someone spends all their time in service of others. It's really just about seeing those times when you're in. I mean, and it really not just care relationships, any relationships, because as we mentioned with the loneliness crisis, like relationships have kind of gone out of style, let alone valuing care. To really see those as this act of becoming, like becoming yourself, like understanding the world and getting away from, right, what are like the big books we read in high school? We have like Huck Finn leaving home to go on the river. We have Henry David Thoreau going to the cabin to like suck the marrow out of life and really live, or Jack Kerouac, everyone's leaving home, hitting the road, the great out there. And it's like, great, yeah, that's awesome. But like, we can also see what we're finding in the home. And we can see what we're finding when we're in these relationships with others that aren't always convenient, aren't always fun, but there's like actually what life is made of.
Thank you guys so much for being here. As I mentioned before, we've got books in the front. If you want to buy, we're going to sign some books as well. So thank you guys so much. We're going to take it home.
I'll take my sweater. It's my first one. Love you.
Just end this.